The San Francisco State University emblem on a white background with black text reading Paul K. Longmore Institute on Disability.
Hello, everyone. This is Emily Badick speaking. I am the Associate Director at the Longmore Institute on Disability, and we are so very pleased to be working with the Disability Visibility Project and Alice Wong to host this event today. What a day to all be together. And I know watching the attendance numbers only increase as the day went on, that a lot of folks like myself could not think of better people to be listening to and learning from than our panelists who are going to have today. Just some quick notes to get us started. On this slide, we have the social media handles, which we've sent out in advance. We encourage you to join the conversation on hashtag disability visibility on Twitter. Next slide, please. You can use the captioning here on Zoom. They've been making it a lot better lately, but even still, if you'd rather view on stream text with a little bit more personalization options, that's possible as well. And we've provided the stream text link as well in the link that was sent also in the chat. If you're having any tech problems, but also if you just want to have a bit of a conversation and share responses to some of what's being said today, or certainly if you have a question for our presenters, because we will have some time for audience questions at the end, please use the Q&A box, or you can send them to my email, which is BEITIKS@SFSU, like San Francisco State University, .edu. And you can also ask them on Twitter. So in the Q&A box on Twitter or by the email, which was the same email that was sent all the reminders. This event is being filmed, and at the very end of the program, we will announce our book winners for today's event. With that, I will ask Yomi to please turn on her camera and join us and take it from there. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. First, thanks for being here today. I hope that wherever you're joining us from, that everyone is safe and healthy, and that you have what you need to be in this space with us. Thank you for being here. We know that this is a historic day. I mean, I'm looking at some of the video feed of people in the streets all over the world who are rejoicing at this turn of events in our country. And, you know, this year has been one for the ages, for the history books. And I was thinking a minute ago about, like, 30 years from now, if I'm still here, what will I tell young people about this day? And I get to say that on the day that we elected this country's first Black woman to the office of vice presidency, I said a prayer, I gave thanks, I took a long overdue nap, and then I spent a couple of hours in the afternoon talking about disability justice with people whose work I follow and I learn from and I admire. So this is a huge blessing and honor for me to be here. I'd like to ask our panelists to also turn on their cameras. I just want to be in this space with y'all as I do this introduction and see your lovely faces. There's Leah, Patty, and Alice. They are going to introduce themselves right after me. And I realize I didn't give you my name. I'm Yomi, Y-O-M-I, Wrong, W-R-O-N-G. I am a little person. I am an African-American woman. I have kind of wavy, curly, dark hair that's pulled back. I'm wearing glasses, and I'm sitting in a power wheelchair. And I am zooming in from the great, now blue state of Arizona. You know, between the election, the pandemic, the ongoing climate catastrophes, this is like quite a moment. And I just want to take a minute to just acknowledge the moment that we're in. And this specific moment, given today's developments regarding the US presidential election, I want to acknowledge the people who made this shift possible. specifically Black Democratic and leftist organizers, Native American organizers, Latinx organizers, and always in all places and in all spaces, BIPOC, queer, trans, and disabled folks who work to get out the vote and get people to the polls and to bring on the shift in this country that we need. So we give you our honor and our thanks for all of the work that you've done. So come January, there will be a huge shift in balance of power in this country. But we also know that our work is not over. It never ends. Justice and liberation for our folks is a long game. So today we're going to talk about some of the people who have been grinding it out and influencing so much of leftist politics and movements. I'm talking about disability justice as a movement, as a political framework, as a way of being in the world. It is my blessing and honor to be in conversation with my friend and comrade, Alice, with Leah, and with Patty. We're going to talk about power and accountability as it relates to liberation and building the world that we want to live in. So I will start us off just by who I see first on my screen and ask Leah to please give an introduction.
Thank you so much, Yomi. Can everybody who can hear me hear me? Sweet. Okay. My name is Leah Lakshmi Piepzna-Samarasinha. I'm going to wait for the interpreter to spell that out. The beauty of having a long, luxurious name. I am a light sand-colored mixed race, Sri Lankan, Roma, and Irish. I like to call myself just another middle-aged punk rock, non-binary autistic femme, coming to you from Duwamish territory. I'm gonna type that in the chat. In South Seattle, historically Black, Filipino, and broke neighborhood, but still is. And yeah, I am got brown and purple curly hair, pink glasses, and I want to show off my t-shirt, which says "Talk to plants, not cops." And what about me? I'm a writer and editor of 9 books, including, I'm going to hold it up, my latest co-edited with my friend and movement comrade, Ejeris Dixon, EJERIS Beyond Survival, Strategies and Stories from the Transformative Justice Movement. I do a lot of shit. I've been involved, I think, in disability justice before it was a word. Like a lot of us who are BIPOC disabled people, because I started as someone who was in the psychiatric survivor movement in Toronto in the 90s, in my early 20s. I'm a movement worker, I'm a regular ass person, I'm a writer, I'm a cultural worker, and I'm someone who does a lot of behind the scenes nudging and bugging people and checking in with people, which I think is a big part of the ways in which, in particular, Black and brown disabled femmes do disability justice. So I will leave it at that. I'm really, really proud to be here. And I just really believe in the power of being obnoxious. And from Massachusetts, I'm from Worcester. So I just want to name that me and my partner's contributions to struggle was we drove around Seattle blasting the song "Fuck Donald Trump" by Nipsey Hussle for an hour today. That's it. I'm going to turn it over to the next person. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. All right. The next person on my screen that I see is Alice. Alice, can you please introduce yourself?
Hey, everybody. My name is Alice Wong. I am delighted to have Patty, Leah, Yomi a conversation today about disability justice. What a perfect day to have this really important conversation about the future. I am an Asian American woman with very short hair, short black hair. My background is all dark. I'm kind of living in a bat cave. I'm basically a night owl slash cyborg slash person who gets into a lot of good trouble on Twitter. I'm also the editor of Disability Visibility, first person stories for the 21st century. which is an anthology that just came out this past summer. And Patty and Leah are both contributors, and again, another reason for such gratitude right now for this time in this space. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Alice. So Patty, I'll ask you to introduce yourself, and then we're going to kick off the conversation. I have a question for you. So if you could just keep your mic on after your introduction, we'll just get into it.
Awesome. Great. Yeah, thank you, Yomi and Emily and Alice, for kind of convening this conversation. I think it's rare when we get to speak with each other around disability justice. That's not just like a tutorial for someone. So I'm excited to kind of get into the topics we were discussing yesterday in preparation for this. So thank you. And my name is Patty Berne. I am a Japanese Haitian, first generation born, kind of right now the kind of Zoom pale that some of us have. So I'm definitely on the lighter beige side right now. I have my hair, I have black hair that's graying, and I have it in buns on my head, and a white shirt, and a bed in the background. I'm 53 years old and have been involved in movement since I was 16, since 1983. So it's been a season or two. Right now, I am the executive director and artistic director of an organization called Invalid. We're a disability justice-based performance project doing both cultural work and movement building work to essentially visualize disabled folks of color, BIPOC, queer, trans folks, specifically artists. And our work is 12 months a year. Talk about a grind. So yeah, we just did our first performance since 2016, and it was called We Love Like Barnacles, Crip Lives in Climate Chaos. And it was a really fantastic show. And I'm really honored to work with such a vast group of performers.
Congratulations on the show. I keep hearing great things about it. You have led us right into the way that I want to begin this conversation. You were talking about just grinding it out and how long you've been doing this work, and talking about sins. And we were talking yesterday about this year and the things that we are bringing us joy and the things we're celebrating. And I think it was you that made the point that, yeah, everybody was talking about 8830, like we celebrated 30 years of the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is important. It's important for our community. But kind of quietly, we also had disability justice turn 15 years old. And when you put into context for me, Patty, that this is like a generation now of this movement work and of this framework, it kind of took me aback when you think of it that way. And we have people who are sort of working and doing movement work, and who are taking the movement into really interesting and exciting and important places, who weren't there at the beginning. But you were there at the beginning, like quite literally. And so I just was hoping you could give a brief kind of reflection on DJ at 15, this first generation of this work that you helped birth.
It's pretty awesome to see the ways that, the kind of field has taken root. I think in the beginning, there was a thirst for a space for, BIPOC, queer, non-binary folks to just be in and identify ourselves as all of that. And, you know, many of us had come from other movements. It was a kind of home finding, but we all came from different movement backgrounds, right? Me and Mingus came from reproductive justice. I, at the time, was coming from bioethics framework, but I'd done the majority of my work in either sexual assault prevention and in working with survivors of violence from multiple contexts, and also from working in liberation movements from other countries where people were organizing here for their home countries. So, you know, we'd come from different backgrounds, right? And now I remember the last group of interns, I was sharing this yesterday, the last group of interns had like come up in disability justice. And it's so exciting to see like young folks like actually just have DJ as their primary focus, you know, as opposed to something that they were, you know, trying to just understand at its base. It's more, it's one of the people we're coming up into like an insurgent framework, right? Into an anti-capitalist framework, understanding disability and productivity and value and worth through an anti-capitalist lens, right? There's the already late assumption that yes, we have rights, and moreover than just rights, like we have worth that is not quantifiable, that is not based in you know, capitalist productive standards. That of course we are intersectional. Of course, you know, we come from, you know, different communities of color, you know, relationships to queer community, and that those all have to be honored. And we can build spaces, you know, I think of them as liberated zones. It might be a friend's living room, or it might be a cafe, you know, but a space where, you know, the novel idea of everyone being, you know, held as beautiful and sacred and worth and having dignity, deserving respect, you know, sexually vibrant, regardless of how we are in the moment. Like this is just the inherent ways that we are being alive, right? And so to see that, I don't know, that being internalized really by a new group of, you know, disabled folks, that's pretty awesome. I mean, I think, yeah, I think to other movements and how, you know, originally, for example, the Black Power movement was just not a novel idea, right? And then to see people that are like, yeah, that's correct, you know. Yeah, it makes me happy and proud.
I don't know if you remember this, Patty, but just when you were talking about 15 years ago and bringing people up and doing the training and the political education, you and Leroy came to me when I was at the Center for Independent Living, and y'all tried to pull me over. You were trying to sort of gently pull me um, into this like politicized way of thinking, and I was still trying to get my arms around the rights movement, and I wasn't quite ready. You know, like we come to our politicized minds in different stages and at different places in life. And I remember thinking, this all sounds really good. And isn't that sort of what we're doing over here? But it's like not what we were doing. So anyway, I just, you know, want to acknowledge that it was very meaningful for me to have some of those early conversations with you and Leroy and of course Stacy and Mia and others, and that, you know, it took me a while, but I'm so glad that um, just that you cared enough about me as a human being to like bring me the information and kind of lay it at my feet and say, here, do with it when you're ready and what you will, and we'll be here. So I don't know if you remember those early conversations.
I do. I absolutely do. And I mean, yeah, of course. I mean, seeing, you know, like, you know, ostensibly like, you know, my crip kin, you know, like someone that could literally be my cousin, like, you know, in the disability rights movement, like I had become so grateful and felt like it was the standard operating procedure in my professional and personal life to be around majority people of color and majority queer folks, and then to have the white people in my life be anti-racist, like explicitly anti-racist. And when I saw you in your context, I was like, oh, I want to just embrace this person. So I'm really glad that we had early and current conversations.
Yeah, I felt the embrace. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, so I just have to take a moment and just, because like I'm tearing up right now thinking about all of that and what it meant for me to be in a rights movement, a disability rights movement that was not anti-racist, like at all. And some of the pushback that I received. Anyway, and so it meant a lot. Your outreach meant a lot. Leroy's outreach meant a lot. Mia's meant a lot. Stacy's will always mean a lot to me. So thank you. Speaking of sort of the DJ movement, and we see ourselves in it. My next question is for Leah. So Leah, I feel like I've been orbiting your sun for a while, your brightness, and we didn't have a chance to know each other until this year. And so it's another gift from our ancestor, Stacy, to connect us in this way. And so I'm getting to know you as a person, getting to know your heart, have always admired your work and feel like this is just a huge blessing for me to be in this space with you. And I would like to know, where do you see yourself in the movement?
I don't fucking know. First of all, Yomi, thank you so much. That means so much. I feel like I'm like, what sun? I'm orbiting your sun. Like, what are you talking about? Like, I would just always hear from Stacy. I'm like, oh yeah, she's always like, that's my sister, you know? And I just, yeah. Anyway, lots of things to think about how we get connected and how ableism keeps us apart. I feel like I don't think I know I'm not the only one in this call where there's people that we're meant to know who we meet after death, you know? Like, I have that poem I wrote about, Laura Hershey friend requested me and I didn't know who she was. And then she passed. And then I was like, and then my sibling Meg Day, you know, who is, you know, white, deaf, genderqueer poet was like, you don't know Laura? And I was like, oh God. But I have a print that a friend made that says my ancestors are learning and loving together. That's something Stacey said at my altar right now. Where do I sell myself in the movement? I think that's a really good question. And I don't want to kind of keep it on me. I kind of want to use that question to open it up, to talk about where are all the parts that we can play in this movement, this big spaceship called disability justice. And Yomi, when you were just talking to Patty about Patty and Leroy coming and speaking to you at the SIL, it was making me think a little bit about just my entry points into disability justice. And so I'm going to say that and kind of tie it all together, hopefully. Sorry, I have the computer on 12 books, so there's a little shaking going on. I apologize. When I said in my introduction that part of my root is claiming the psychiatric survivor movement and the organizing I was in the 90s as disability justice before it was a word, you know, I mean, my entry point, you know, to speak to what Patty was saying about coming from different movements, was that my early 20s were when I was very visibly crazy, you know, and the psych survivor movement saved my life. Being in movement space that was Black and brown in Toronto, that was very much about prison justice and that saw linkages between prison abolition and disability and psych survivorhood was so important. Something my friend and comrade Cyrus, Syrus, Marcus Ware and I talk about was that we were little 20-year-olds in the 90s. And he was like, he's like, when I was a Black trans disabled guy doing prison justice day, it was this disability justice work but we didn't call it that. We didn't name, and definitely the SIL and the disability rights folks were not there, right? And so then fast forward to, I got less visibly neurodivergent. I got really into queer and trans people of color cultural work, came to Oakland, but in that work, I really felt like I had to closet my disability, right? And then when I ran into SINS, I was just like, oh, okay, it was that liberated zone. It was that coming home. And so some of the way I've seen my role in the past, 10 years since then has been, first of all, as a cultural worker, as a writer, I wrote the book Care Work, which, I was like, okay, this can, it wasn't supposed to be a DJ book. It ended up being, oh, these are all my disabled essays. Great. And I was just like, this is a recruiting strategy. I want my essays to go out there, and I think it worked. I mean, I don't give a shit. I didn't get a lot of reviews. What mattered was people being like, well, I was in the psych ward and I got your book, or I was in prison, or I'm in the middle of Indiana, or I'm in Mumbai and I'm reading this. And I always thought of my cultural work as both a recruitment strategy, whether it's for disability justice or transformative justice, because people are isolated, but they can get a book, they can get a zine. And also it's a CRIP organizing strategy, because I mean, I didn't name it in my image description, but I'm committing a quote unquote Zoom crime because I have a messy background. But this is my office. That's my bed with the flannel sheets back there. And I was in it till an hour ago. And I can write from bed. I can write from bed. I can be on Facebook from bed. A lot of the ways and places I found myself doing disability justice organizing in the past decade was in bed, on online
We
spaces.
can build whole worlds in our
Right. Well,
heads.
and like Sick and Disabled Queers, which I always shouted out, which was founded by the great Billie Rain, Billie Rain, Mizrahi torture survivor, chronically ill, neurodivergent person, who also was trying to be like, hey, disability in radical POC movement spaces for years before DJ. And then after, Sick and Disabled was the place where all of us who were the one little radical disabled Black or brown person, wherever, could come together and talk and be really horizontal. And I guess bringing it to where we are now, I've really felt at a crossroads in the past year where I'm just like, what am I doing? Like, what? Because, and it's not just like, oh, COVID, it's like the movement's changing and the world's changing. I really was like, oh, until last year, I was very ambulatory with a lot of ice packs. So I was like, oh, I can use that walkie privilege to take, in-person college gigs and go recruit, and also bring all my comrades, thinking, activism, knowledge there. And I was like, I feel good about that, and then I can be home and recover. There's no more college gigs, but also I don't think there needs to be in this way, because I mean, in the past year, I mean, just going back with what you and Patty were both saying, there's DJ everywhere. Like something I was talking about with Leroy last week on his radio show was, he was like, yeah, 10 years ago. And I was like, oh, 10 years ago, it felt like there was 25 of us who knew what the hell we were talking about when we said DJ in the whole country to me. And now there's like little collectives, little groups, like people all over. And I couldn't name everybody if I wanted to. And that's amazing. And so now I'm just like, okay, so how do I play my position in a way that supports that, in a way that's accessible and pleasurable? And I think that just in the past week, I was like, oh, I'm a writer. So I just started writing disabled BIPOC science fiction, and I've written 2 short stories in the past week. I lost my phone, because neurodiversity. And then I was like, oh, great, I'm so much less anxious. I'm not looking at Twitter all the time. So I was like, I'm actually doing creative writing instead of scanning Instagram for an hour every morning. So I think I want to be listening a lot. There's that quote that goes around that says, if you're middle-aged or up and you don't have younger mentors, you're missing out. And I'm just like, there's so much of this next generation, if you want to call it that, of people who come up in disability justice, where I'm like, I want to learn from you. I want to listen to you. I want to take in what you have to say. I really want to I want to, do a lot of support and mentorhood and coaching, because I mean, that was one thing that me and Stacey did a lot. Like, we had this work-wife partnership where, it was so under the radar, but we spent the last 2 or 3 years doing all this base building with disabled BIPOC in Oregon and Southwest Washington, like bringing together different rising leaders who are super isolated and just doing a lot of cheerleading, a lot of political education, a lot of you can do it. And now we've got people who are like, oh, we're trying to take over the SIL. Oh, we have a disability justice collective Rebel Black is somebody who's, disability justice, mutual aid pod mapping worksheets all over the place, and they were like, I just wrote that on Google Docs. And I'm like, right. But as is true for so many people, there's this ways internalized ableism. I talked to so many people who are like, am I a real organizer? Do I really know how to do this? And I think the main thing, especially as the years go by and there's more of a tension now, or a dynamic of like, oh, there's some people who are like the leaders. And I was like, no, 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 no. This is supposed to be a movement of lots of people who've been shut out of every movement who are brilliant. And what I always told people when they were like, how do you join DJ? I'm like, DJs, when you get you and your two friends or your one friend or a tree, I don't care, whatever whatever the disability community where you're at is, and you sit down together and you go, what are the needs and issues and possibilities and powers of our community? And you go from there. I want it to stay as fiercely horizontal as it has always been. So to a certain degree, I want to step out of the way.
Yeah, like DJ starts in your mind. You decolonize your mind, and like you get your mind around your worth, your value, and your position in the world, and then you sort of go from there. But Leah, that kind of leads really nicely into a question that I have for Alice about just the dynamics between, folks who were sort of the origin thinkers and the origin movers in DJ, and new activists who have inherited the framework. And Alice, where are you? There you are. Alice, like, you have your tentacles like everywhere, through your media work, through Twitter, through social media. I mean, you are really a media shaper, and a media maker for our time. And one, I want to thank you for that. I want to thank you for your brilliance. I want to thank you for all that you give and do for our community and for people everywhere. And I want to thank you for being my friend. I said it publicly in front of 365 people. I love you. But I feel like you are places where I'm not, where a lot of people aren't, just by the nature of the work that you do. So what are your thoughts on this dynamic between the DJ sort of originators and new activists who are taking up space and inheriting the framework? I mean, I loved what Leah just said about like, how do you play your position as somebody who's been around for a while to like continue to support the movement, but I would love to hear your thoughts.
Oh, thank you, Yomi, and I love you too. So I think just to back up a little bit, I would also like to share kind of like my entry point into disability justice, because I think I've been identified by other groups or people as a leader at DJ, and I still feel very much as just a student and just part of the movement. I'm very uncomfortable with the labels such as experts. When people ask me to give a talk or a workshop, I usually preface my talk or presentation that, I'm just one person who's trying to learn, trying to live these values. I don't think I, can, not to like, I don't think I can really embody every aspect all the time. But I don't think that's what DJ is about, right? That's not what it's about. It's about taking the principles and having them transform the way you think, the way you orient your work, your relationship to the world, and thinking more collectively. And I think everything else that DJ is about, it takes time to really think about how do we be intentional with our actions. So I want to be a very, explicit, transparent that I'm not, I'm not fully, one of those people who can really say, I live DJ, because I just am a work in progress, like a lot of people. And I would have to think, looking back, probably my first entry into disability justice was through Stacey Milburn and Mia Beekes' blogs and their writings. And I think this is where I'm like, oh my goodness, like this is So look at this, like two Asian American disabled people, just like people who are just like so thoughtful, just so loving, so incredibly moving with their work and their writing and the way they related with each other. And I thought, okay, I've got to learn more. And then I think the other big, moment of gratitude clearly is with Invalid. Did the work of Patty. I mean, I think the world of Patty. I think of the world of the entire Invalid crew. Shout out to Invalid. Um, I think I'm so lucky to be part of the San Francisco Bay Area where we have such a wealth of disability culture that really does foster disability justice and all the things that are overlapping it, including the disability rights. I mean, the community is a community of multiple communities. And I think that's where the depth and range, where we have such a wealth and abundance. So I really want to acknowledge that. And, my understanding of disability justice, it's been a few years, but I don't think it's been my entry point is much later than Leah and Patty's. So that's where I'm speaking from. I do think it's very exciting to see all kinds of folks all over the world thinking of disability justice and moving it forward, or just maybe evolving it. They're taking what was originally created here in the San Francisco Bay Area, but also, transforming it, tweaking it, to moving it forward. And I think that's very, very exciting and very healthy. Because we want movements to continue. I think, but I think any movement, when they get a little bit too precious or maybe worried, I think that's also maybe a way to stifle growth. But, I think on the flip side, erasure and co-optation does happen. And the forgetting of those who are the originators, I think that's also really important too. So I think those things can all exist in the same space. I do want to say that just based on some of my interactions with different kind of leaders who are, outside of the San Francisco Bay Area, I would say that Sarah Jama, Jama, from the Disability Justice Network of Ontario, is doing very exciting work. And also, I would have to say, my friend Sandy Ho, who is the creator of the Disability and Intersectionality Summits. She's a game changer too. And this gives me life, I'm in my mid 40s, and it makes me really happy to see so many people at different points of their life. Not just young people, but just people coming in who are really, they don't have the same kind of like hiccups. Everything's kind of fluid, and it's not either or. And I think that's the future, right? That's what it's all about. And in this commentary about ancestors, because I feel like this is a moment of gratitude for us and a moment of us coming together. I would like to acknowledge the late Stacey Park Milburn, who is one of the contributors to Disability and Visibility. And if I could just take this short moment to read a quote from one of her essays. This essay is in the book, and it was published on my blog post. It's published on my website early 2019, and I'm just so grateful that we were able to publish this and that she gave permission to have it republished in the book. And I'll just read this very short quote because I feel this is her kind of giving her take on this. And this is something just for us to think about. So here's a short excerpt. It is from the essay by Stacy titled On the Ancestral Plane, Trip Hand-Me-Downs and the Legacy of Our Movements. My ancestors are people torn apart from loves by war and displacement. It's because of them I know the power of building home with whatever you have, wherever you are, whoever you are with. I believe that our ancestors laugh, cry, hurt, rage, celebrate with us. Most importantly, I believe they learn as we are learning, just as we learn from them. We grow knowledge and movements with them. We grip futurism with them. We demand and entice the world to change the way things have always been done with them. We change ourselves with them. They learn through us. When we become ancestors, we will also continue to learn. So I'll just leave it with that.
Thank you, Alice. It's nice to hear Stacy's voice in this space. We have just a few minutes left for our conversation, and then Emily will announce the winners of the book giveaway, and then we'll take some Q&A from people who are joining us. So I want to end with some questions or just some thoughts around power, leadership, and accountability. And I'll start with you, Patty. Where does power, leadership, and accountability come together for you? And a second question, what are you seeing either here in the United States or abroad that is nuanced in terms of advancing justice?
I mean, I think those are two big overarching kind of.
And feel free just to take one of them on. That's fine. I didn't mean to throw a lot at you there.
No, it's fine. I appreciate the thinking, and I I think of leadership as service and like supporting and developing other people is kind of the main job of leadership, and at the same time simultaneously keeping our eyes on the horizon. I think one of the things that I've seen is, and I feel like I experienced, is a synthesis of information as I've gotten older. And I think when it's one of the gifts, I think that, being around for a minute, like, teaches us is that we've seen things like, and at the same time, there are things that I have yet to see, in everyone. But I think, like, serving to support other people developing leaders, other people as emerging leaders, is a key part of what leadership is. And I also think that dispersing power is, I mean, I've had people that that are a little bit maybe approach me almost like fangirlish, for whatever reason. I don't know why. But it's like, it's always awkward, right? And for me, because, like, we're like, you're so amazing. I'm like, so are you. Like, we're all amazing. That's the point. And I think it's a real challenge with ableism when we're taught to not see our power and our strength and our ability and our creativity, or we're taught to, that we should undermine. Like we're taught to not see it as our unique gift, right? Um, and and that holds true for ableism, for white supremacy, um, for kind of a colonial mindset, right? What the ways that we are, the gifts that we bring are somehow less than, and so I think one of the things that's really important for folks that have done some of that decolonizing work already is to create spaces where people feel safe, um, to do that work, to do that decolonizing work, um, because I think that's really like a key step for us as we grow, for any of us as we grow, and to the extent that we haven't done our own work, like those are going to be, you know, kind of things that we trip over, like we have to deal with, like our self-hate as Crips and our, um, you know, uh, feeling desexualized and feeling um, marginalized, and we have to like look those things kind of, you know straight on, and I think of it as almost like extricating, like pulling out, like this, like, you know uh, it's almost like slime, like white supremacist slime that somehow got inside of me. I have to like pull out of me, and I'm making a face, and like pulling from my chest. So I'm pulling slime off of me because that's, I love science fiction, so I think of things in those kind of visual. And anyway, I think that we need to create spaces for folks, co-create spaces with folks. And one of the bigger things I think about having done work longer, and this is true, I think, just generationally, like we have access to more resources, right, as we get older, and again, like dispersing, just dispersing resources. I think that's huge, huge for those of us that have access to whatever resource that is, a platform to speak on, or, you know, social capital, or, actual material resource, or whatever it is. Like it doesn't belong to us. Like it belongs to all of us, and so dispersing that, um, I think is really part of being accountable. Um, and I also think just like there's a way that, we learn just from how we roll with each other, and so I don't know. This might sound however it sounds. I don't really care, but I know it might not sit for everyone. But I think that love is really important. Loving ourselves, and like loving each other, even when things are difficult, like holding each other. Um, and so I think modeling that is a huge part of uh, growing with each other.
That's beautiful, Patty. Thank you for that. And it's good to hear you talk about accountability and sharing resources. I mean, there's like in a lot of ways, DJ's having this moment right now, right? Like philanthropy is paying attention, people are paying attention. There's money rolling into folks. People are getting more entree to more, I would say, mainstream spaces, right, to be able to talk about these ideas and to shape other movements. Um, and so I just like to hear someone like you talk about that sense of accountability and sharing the fruits of that and what you have access to now that maybe you didn't have access to 20 years ago. Um, so thank you, Patty. Um, For Leah, I'm going to ask you sort of a similar question, but a little bit different about power. And it's about like, where do we gain power? Like, what is the best path to gain power? Is it extracting power from the state? Many of us, I mean, I know for me, I come out of a rights-based model. And I'm now working more and thinking more in a justice-based model, but that doesn't work everywhere. Like the three of us had this conversation last night about how a rights-based model doesn't exist in some parts of the world, many parts of the world. And so where do you extract power? Is it in autonomous zones? Is it autonomous disabled struggles? And I would just love to hear you, Leah, just like school us, talk to us a little bit about where do we extract power? Where do we build power?
Mhm. Thank you. Well, the first thing I just want to say is, first and foremost, Stacey had this quote, "We are our own best strategy to win. We have power." Okay, we don't have to go get it from anywhere. We have it. We are our own source of power as disabled, Black, Indigenous, Brown, queer, trans, etc. people. And you know, I'm an anarchist, anti-colonialist, so I believe in a diversity of tactics. I was joking with people that I was like, you know, whatever happens this week, I voted for Biden because I will organize against a neoliberal more than I can against a white supremacist. And I still know how to set a couch on fire on my street to block the cops. I can do both. I practice many styles. So, I mean, in terms of where we get power, I think that I just want to keep saying, no matter what happens, no matter, you know, whether we're in a moment where disability justice becomes the new hot topic for funders, or whether that gets taken away and they give the money someplace else, that, you know, we have always built amazing things that abled people and normal people could never imagine. You know, I mean, when Stacey bought her house, you know, the Disability Justice Culture Club, that was just last summer. That house was bought by 20, you know, she was like, it's the entire movement sending $20 from their SSI check on the first of the month. That's what raised the money to make the ramp. You know, I think about so many moments that have really changed disabled lives that come from us as disabled Black and Brown people, not just fundraising for each other, but loving each other, coaching ourselves through stuff, talking each other through things, building community resources. We don't need the state or foundations to do that. And I think that in terms of the decolonization process that Patty was speaking to, which is so important, which is an ongoing struggle of ridding, you know, internalized ableism for ourselves, we have to be in a continual process of remembering that we are our own best thing, you know, as Toni Morrison said. And that includes when it's complicated and we're not sure what the next step is. I kind of flubbed. I felt like I kind of flubbed the question you asked me before.
No, it's okay.
But I just wanted to say that, like, in terms of, you know, where I'm at in the movement, where the movement's at, there's been a tremendous amount of sick and disabled-led mutual aid that's been going on for years. And this year, the whole world got cripped because of the pandemic. So they discovered, oh, wow, we have to ask for help. But as Crips, we've been keeping each other alive. And I want to name the different strategies of power because it's been us. You know, I've been on a bunch of mutual aid webinars where people are like, how you do it? And I'm like, well, disabled people do it differently. Like, I had able-bodied mutual aid collectives being like, oh, do you want to go to the supermarket? And I was like, I can't leave the house. I have no immune system. But what I have been doing is calling 20 friends a day, just being like, hey, how you doing? You want to play a video game and not talk about it? You want a food drop off on the porch? You know, let's crack a joke. We also, so that's one strategy, is real grassroots level mutual aid, survival programs, refusing to let each other die in all kinds of ways, refusing to forget about each other, you know. And then I look at, you know, the Nobody is Disposable Coalition and many, many other, you know, policy-based, you know, movement moments where people have fought against IC eugenics, right? Care rationing, like all of those, oh, you're disabled, you don't get the ventilator, your life doesn't matter. That's killed people already. And have fought on a state level to be like, no, we're going to push back against that on a policy level. I think we need both. I think that it's always about opportunities. Like, Biden's not Jesus. No, he's an old white man who pats disabled people on the head. But if we can push him to not only be like, oh no, motherfucker, bring back Olmstead, keep the ACA, But on a policy level, I think about, it's not about care collectives with 3 people on the one hand and staying with, the system as it is on the other. I'm like, what if there's a CARE Act? What if we had a federal level thing, if we're still in this system that says everyone has a right to care, that's autonomous, that's respected, where caregivers are well paid, where there's none of this fucking SSDI policing about, are you really disabled? Prove it. What about that? Like, I could go on, but like, and then even if it's not the federal government, what do we do to push locally, right? And I see so much hope in, as Patty and Yomi, you were both speaking to, I think that, in the 20 teens, when I was new to disability justice, I would kind of naively go into, non-disabled Black and brown spaces, queer and trans Black and brown spaces, and be like, hey, I'm going to tell you about this cute thing I just discovered. And I would just hope they would just be like, oh, great, disability justice. And instead, for years, they would just be like, no, we're going to keep being ableist. What, you have issues? Forget it. You're just depressing. But, the new generation often is like of younger and rising leftist organizers who are not necessarily disabled. They put the D in their movement. They're like, oh, of course we have CART. Oh, no, we can just hold the sage up. We don't have to burn it because we know people have asthma. And I'm like, this is a fucking miracle. I mean, sorry, I'm a Star Trek geek. So Ian Alexander, who is the Vietnamese trans actor who portrays Grey, he's just all ACAB and talking about being neurodiverse on his Twitter. And I'm like, we did this, he did this, we did this. And cultural things like the impact that disabled and autistic Black and brown Instagram has had on people's skill levels, self-love, ability to think about their relationship to pleasure in their bodies. There are all these little micro moments, when people are like, oh, maybe I'm disabled, maybe I should learn something, where it's like just being able to ask for help and care and do it in a way where your autonomy is respected. It's the $6 million question. And I see people getting to that place a lot quicker than my generation did, where, it took me 15 years to be like, oh, maybe I could ask someone to get me groceries when I'm flat on my ass and not hate myself. So that's power too. It's making demands of the state. It's also organizing outside the state, so we're not dependent on them. It's both and. And I think that's a tension because sometimes people have been like, well, you DJ people are just on some commune in California. I'm in the middle of Iowa on the system. What do you have for me? And I'm like, no, it's both and. It is both and. And it is knowing that we deserve more than, being predicated on, oh, I have friends, they'll care for me, or the state as it is. Like we can, that's why I brought in science fiction. Like we deserve to dream bigger. We deserve to have a disability justice future where there's liberation, where there is not a medical industrial complex, where it is truly known there is no one right or wrong way to have a body or a mind, right? And where prison's over. And I think that our power is in our disabled creativity. Stacey helped. I was like, girl, you wrote Bernie Sanders' disability platform. And she's like, oh, I was one of a few people. And I'm like, he talks about disabled Black people in prison. What? And I'm like, okay, he didn't win, but that's a push. And then we build on that, right? Yeah. I just want people to remember that we have power in our wild imaginings.
I'm really glad. No, that's great. I'm really glad that you brought up like the person, I think you said in Idaho or Iowa, like I'm thinking of the middle of the country that says, well, that's fine for like the DJ coastal elites. You guys have all this community and all this history and all this legacy. And I see those are some of the questions that are coming our way in the Q&A. It's like, there's so much isolation in disabled people's lives, and living in isolation and not having political home and not having a way to connect with other disabled people. And I could just say, you could be like in Berkeley in the middle of, what they consider the birthplace of the disability rights movement and still be isolated politically from a lot of different people and systems. So I believe in building community where you are. And I think that's really important for people to know that this can happen, does happen everywhere, and we can make it happen. So this was great. I could keep talking to y'all for another hour or two, but I know that we need to pivot for just a few minutes to Emily, who's going to announce the winners of the book giveaway. And then I think we'll have time. Emily can let me know how much time we have for questions. All yours, Emily.
Hi, everybody. I can do an audio description of myself and say that I'm super flushed, and I know it's because I'm like, oh God, this is amazing. So super stoked to be listening in on this. Audio description, because I missed it earlier since my video wasn't adequately turning on. I'm a white woman in my 30s with a neon stripy sweater. And if we can have our slideshow, we will announce the winners. Congratulations to our 10 book winners. I will be saying the names, and I apologize in advance if I mess your name up. It is not personal. Yasmin Gray, Stan Midwood, Regina Brink, Mika Bazant, Lisa Diedrich, Julia Lamb, Jason Bowen, Emily Ackerman. Uh-oh. Sorry, one sec. The captions are actually blocking my ability to see. We have a Crystal Hopkins and now I can see Bree Milgram. So if you were one of the lucky winners, you can email me. Once again, my email is beitiks@sfsu.edu, or you can reply to the reminder email that was sent to you for today's webinar, and we will send you a form to tell us what format you'd like. This is a copy of Disability Visibility, Alice Wong's anthology, and with our including essays from our speakers today. And you'll get to choose if you want an electronic copy or a hard copy or the audiobook. If you did not win, there is still another chance to get a free copy at the next Disability Visibility event that we'll be collaborating with Longmore Institute, and we will be sending out more information on that soon. So with that, Yomi, I will pass it back to you, and we have 25 minutes until we need to be fully concluded and wrapped up. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Emily, and congratulations to the winners of this amazing book. So for the Q&A, we got some interesting questions coming through. I am going to just stop my video. You'll hear my voice so that we can have Patty and Leah and Alice so that I can see them all on my screen. And then folks can just sort of signal with a wink, a head nod, or arm raised or whatever if you want to take on the specific question. Okay, so let me just switch for a minute here. This one will be a quick one, and maybe you can give a link or a resource. I think this question would be for Leah. Somebody said, wait, what's the psychiatric survivor movement? Because I think I am, but never knew there was a name.
Oh, I love this question. This is Leah. So the psychiatric survivor movement is a term that I first encountered in the 90s in Toronto. Some people also call it the MAD movement or the MAD Pride movement, or there's a lot of overlap with neurodiversity. But it's basically a movement of people who have been medicalized as crazy, who've experienced psychiatrization, whether that means being locked up or institutionalized or being in the outpatient world, but people who think differently and who have what's named as quote unquote mental illness. And I come from a rich tradition in the 90s in Toronto of us doing huge unpermitted marches of very crazy people through the streets of our neighborhoods, fighting against forced treatment, forced incarceration of quote unquote mad people, and really naming ourselves as the experts on our own experience. Some places that you could check out now are the website madqueer.org that my friend Elliot Fukui, F-U-K-U-I, runs, who's really amazing. And I also want to shout out the Fireweed Collective. And if you look up Psychiatric Survivor Archives Toronto, there's like 40 years of, newspapers, zines, protest files, poetry, academic stuff. Yeah, it's great. And I know there's a lot of global Mad Pride stuff that's happening right now in Mexico and lots of other places.
All right. Thank you, Leah. Patty, I'm going to, the first question I think will be a very quick answer, and then the second one will, I think, require more thought and conversation, and then I'll invite Leah and Alice to also chime in. So the first question, Patty, is will there be more chances to see the most recent Sins show online?
Oh, yes. Folks should check us out on social media to find out when that will be. We're hoping for an immediate second weekend, but yeah, booking, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, people should see it. It's one of the best shows we've done.
Okay, great. And then the second question, which I think, we all might have something to say about, what advice do you have for responding to or combating white disabled individuals who try to co-opt disability justice and turn it into something that it is not to make them feel good about themselves? Performative disability justice. This comes from a person who identifies as a disabled BIPOC, and the co-opting infuriates them, but they also struggle with how to respond. So Patty, if you can start us off with how do we negotiate this?
I mean, I've asked people, everybody's different. And so everybody's approach to anyone is different. And we have to think about the goal of what our communication is. And if I'm just pissed and I want to go off, I will call my friend and do that. But if I'm trying to change this person's practice, I have to vent somewhere else and then approach this person. But it is a common thing that I believe that, there's expropriation of all good work. We could see what, Amazon or whomever did to Black Lives Matter, putting fucking like strips of, we care kind of BS, for one day. So expropriation of work happens, and I think just calling people out, people in, calling on their sense of good judgment, and I mean, I approach people and I ask, I'm curious, where you entered this, what, kind of where you enter this conversation, as a white person, being accountable to, Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities, queer and trans and non-binary communities, where basically to whom are you accountable? Because this is a community and an emerging movement that centers people that are most marginalized. So in what ways, does your work have a relationship with and is accountable to folks that are more marginalized? And people are just trying to co-opt it and do disability service, for example, which is important. I've asked people, why don't you, I literally have asked people, can you call it disability service? Since that's what you're doing and that is important, but don't just slap a justice tag on it, because I think that implies something very different. And I think just to gain your integrity, I you should speak about the fabulous work that you're doing appropriately, and be in integrity with that.
I just really appreciate the approach that you described in the beginning, where you said, if you just want to go off, you call a friend. But if you want to be constructive, then you will gently call out or call in the person, because I see so much of this happening, and I often will advise people who turn to me for advice or mentorship to not just jump on this bandwagon of, calling people out online and shaming them and, and having these online wars and attacks, but let's be constructive about it. And so I appreciate that tactic. And then sometimes people absolutely need to be shut down and called out. So I think there's a time and a place, for everything. But I'd love to hear. So, Patty, first, thank you for that. I think that your wisdom and your thoughtful approach to this, because you've seen a lot and you've been around a long time, I'm sure you've seen it a lot and you've had to have these taps on the shoulders with people quite a few times. So I think we could all take something from your approach. Leah or Alice, would either of you like, okay, Leah, let's go to you. What do you, how do you handle this, and what should be the response in your view?
Sometimes I do go off. The great thing about being autistic with like 5 spoons a day of energy is I don't have time for online wars, but there are times where when a call-in hasn't worked that I think anger is totally appropriate. I also think, not always by any means, but sometimes people are ignorant. They're honestly ignorant. They just think, oh, disability justice, it's the new term. And they don't know the history. So then I go back and I go, do you know where this was invented? Do you know this was invented by 2 Black disabled people? Do you know the 10 principles of disability justice? I find it really important for me to say this is specifically a anti-capitalist movement that is about cross disability. It's not just about let's get a disabled white man in the White House, and I go back to a quote that Patty said a while ago a lot, where you said disability justice centers the lives and leadership of people of color, of queer and trans people with disabilities. And if it doesn't have that, it's not disability justice, right? Here's the thing. I want white disabled people to like get it, all of it. But part of the getting it is they don't always understand that in terms of how disability organizing plays out, it has been easier for years for white disabled people to claim disability and then to claim disabled leadership. It's harder for a lot of Black and brown people to be like, oh, I can claim this name, right? That's why DJs functioned as a liberated zone for so many disabled Black and brown folks to be like, oh, this is a community that looks like me and reflects my interests and issues. I can come home, I can say all of these things that have been not safe to talk about in terms of disability, right? And the moment, white disabled people will just take over. If you're not very specific, you'll have like 80 white disabled folks, and then you'll have a lot of disabled Black and brown folks who look at that room and go, oh no, I'm not going in there. So for me, it's important to talk about that as a dynamic that's challenging, not people that are bad, right? And then to also, for me, I've really focused on, the writing classes that I threw online for years. Frida and Harriet's Children have consistently been for Black, Indigenous, and POC, sick and disabled folks only, right? Because I'm like, when do we get a writing class that's buy-in for sick and disabled BIPOC writers, where that's who we're reading to, right? And I know that so many people I know, it was hard for them to sign up to begin with, but if it was mixed, they wouldn't have done it, right? And the one time I experimented with doing a 70% Black and brown and 30% white class. It was good, but people were a lot shyer, and a lot of Black and brown folks were like, I'll wait till you do the BIPOC only one. So it's like affirmative action. Like, we need space that's just for us to be able to build our platform and have the conversations that we can only have, and build our base and identify our strategies, our strengths, build our community, right? So I think that in terms of, what I want to do that's more constructive maybe is to speak to those white disabled people and be like, do you really care about DJ? Then you got to take a step back and listen and work to support Black and brown disabled people, and work to confront the racism within white disabled spaces. Don't just slap DJ on your box of cornflakes and say, and point yourself the executive director and say that's what it is. That's not disability justice. And I think that goes even more so for people who are not disabled at all, but who are white and who say, oh, DJ, and that's a whole other story. Those people, I'm just like, ugh. But we have to keep naming the history, and we have to keep naming the lineage, and we have to keep saying this is what it is. It's not just the updated Oldsmobile. It's a completely different ecosystem around disability, than a white rights-based model.
I think also, and there were some questions about it, and I think, people can like Google it, look it up. There's a lot of information out there, but it's also just like people understanding the difference between disability rights and disability justice, and that they're not the same thing. And yeah, there's another question. There are two really good questions about the integration or the intersection of disability justice into both environmental justice and food justice. So Alice, would you like to take on one of those? Also, there's a question about how to integrate disability justice into educational settings.
Yeah, I think Patty might be best to talk about the intersections of climate justice and
Okay.
disability justice, as our essay did the anthology was about this subject. But just to back up a little bit about the previous question, I would say, this is also, as Leah said, there's asking people to think about the origins. Whenever I get these kinds of requests or questions, I refer them to this Invalid Disability Justice Primer, Leah's Care Work, Dreaming Disability Justice. Like, these are just such essential resources that I just share time and time again. And I think that's what's so wonderful, to have a growing body of work about disability justice. That's super easy. Just share the links and do your homework. And I guess I just another little pet peeve is, I also see, not only do I say this, sometimes on repeat, it still needs to be on repeat, but number one, disability justice is not a synonym to disability rights, just as intersectionality is not a synonym for diversity. I think that gives me the biggest side eye. I just roll my eyes so hard when people use the adjective intersectional, but they really mean diverse. And again, it's about citing the source, citing Black women, and also just remembering what it really means, rather than just using this term because a lot of people are thinking about it more deeply. So that's all I'm going to say, and I'll let Leah and Patty answer the next question.
Thank you, Alice. Patty, can you talk about the intersection or integration of disability justice in both environmental justice and food justice?
Yeah. And I can speak to it in the context of Zin's work. I'm sure there's many other, collectives and individuals that are doing work, interfacing or engaging with environmental justice work. But I can speak to what I've been doing and where I've seen shift. Initially, when we're doing, kind of establishing disability justice, the who and the how in many ways, and kind of developing principles and practices. We're also checking out what other movements were receptive and what were not, and who really needed it, right? And it became really clear that environmental justice actors were needing an analysis of disability because they were using us as the worst case scenarios. We need to stop, lead poisoning, or you will become like this. And it's like a picture of.
It's so awful.
Yes. And I was like, oh, okay, no, don't do that. And, that's where, I had relationships also. And so there's that kind of is how part of how it came to be. And then also, we're fucking drowning and burning, and like, who the fuck comes and saves us? Nobody. Our friend, like, seriously, that's what the entire that show was about so intensely. Like, there there's no plan, and we can see who's on the roofs, if they could even get to the roofs of Katrina, or any of the multitude of disasters that have happened, in the US at this point, are too many to count, where people's disabilities are left high and dry, and like, we clearly, environmental justice movement needs to include and center us, because they rest upon an analysis where those most impacted are centered. And we're dying in super high numbers. Look at Puerto Rico, like, anyway, it kind of freaks me out, because clearly the trajectory of this planet is to me, it's a matter of how our species leaves the planet, not if. Which brings me back to love. I think that we can leave spiteful and, angry with each other, or we can leave, like, loving each other and humbly and in relation to the earth as best as we can, to have as little impact on, all of her environments as possible. But, you know, we've created conditions where our species is not going to be able to survive in mass. So the environmental justice movement really has to understand how precarious our lives already are, and um, speak to the centrality of building a future where we are included, to the extent that our species is going to be included on the earth. Um, and I have to say, people have been really responsive. Um, we're doing a partnership with Movement Generation, who's a leading, you know, BIPOC led environmental climate justice. They're a climate justice organization. And we're doing a study group with them and really building with them to have a deeper understanding and analysis. We'll see where it reverberates out from there. But I've found, you know, Movement Generation to be a fantastic kind of landing place for disability justice imaginings. And, I really want to acknowledge the work of Natasha Simpson, who did work around food justice and disability justice, and, just speaking to current conditions and how many of us can access food easily and accessibly, because of economic marginalization, and because of, uh, you know, access support or lack of access support, um, because of institutional barriers where people are living to access food, in incarcerated in nursing homes or prisons. Like, how is, like, impossible is it to access food, when our bodies are struggling to maintain. And so, and there are rich histories of people with disabilities tending the land, BIPOC people tending land. And of course, like, Crips have always been around. So, of course, there are Crips that have been farmers and, are, have deep relationships with plants and um, the estrangement of humans from land and our, I think of them as plant babies, but like, are like, you know, our our green, you know, family members. Um, like I think that's a deeper conversation about all of, not necessarily a deeper conversation, but that's a conversation for all of us, right? It's not specific to disability justice. It's, and I always, you know, when people ask like, who's disability justice for? And I, you know, my only answer is for anybody with a body, right? Because all of us have a relationship with marginalization and capitalism and you know, our labor and, um, you know, with some context not being, you know, supported in our full capacities. So anyway, similarly with, um, I think with climate justice, it's about all humans' relationship with land. Sorry, that was a long, meandering answer because it kind of is a meta thinking that goes into the kind of movement, the movement relationships, you know.
Yeah. No, it was a good answer. It was the answer. It was the right answer. uh, Unfortunately, I think we're right up at time. We might have 2 minutes or three to go, and maybe we could quickly answer one last question. Can you speak to how people with sensory disabilities can collaborate more effectively with other with disability justice organizations? So this is asked from somebody who worked for the California Council of the Blind, who said historically there was a lot of working together in collaboration, but that's been disrupted in recent times. And I'm guessing the recent times is sort of these COVID times where people aren't sort of getting together. I think that that's what that's referring to, but if anybody can speak to just that collaboration and integration of folks with sensory disabilities. I mean, I would say now is, if you're feeling that disconnect, now is a really good time to plug back in, because there aren't the same barriers of like mobilization, having to move around and actually show up for meetings and events in the way that it was last year. So in some ways, being in spaces like this it's actually more open and accessible to more people and more different people with different types of disabilities. I think that's one of the positive outtakes from this year. And I mean, I am missing being in physical proximity to people in spaces, but I think that now is sort of the time to kind of dig in and make connections with people virtually that maybe you haven't been able to before. Leah?
Yeah, I just wanted to add really quickly. I mean, I think that this is a really prime example of, you know, where the rubber meets the road when it comes to one of the 10 principles of disability justice, which is cross disability organizing, right? And it's like the nitty gritty of, if we are meeting on Zoom, right? Like, is there cart? You know, is there audio description? Is there ASL? Are there pauses? Are there sensory breaks? All of the things. um I think just really thinking about things like that, like, you know, there's so much information being shared online, and I've really learned from listening to a lot of deaf and deafblind folks who are like, no, describe that shit. It's not. And it's interesting for me as someone who may seem verbally talkative, but often this is my second language. As an autistic person, I'm mostly nonverbal as the primary way I process information. For me, when infographics started coming, I was like, oh, pictures, great. And then it's been an active act of solidarity to be like, yes, and let's make it so that we're continually pushing so that every way that we communicate and share information is multisensory, right? So that, you know, it's sensory, it's accessible to folks who are nonverbal, non-vocal, blind, deaf, you know, the list goes on, right? And I think that especially as we're in, you know, COVID Zoom times where all these abled organizations are like, oh my God, Zoom. Oh, there's a thing called captioning. Let's do it badly. It's been really amazing to be like, as a disabled, because people are like, you understand how Zoom works? And I was like, I've taught 200 people on Zoom from my yes, of course I know how Zoom works. It's been really important for us to reflect back on, as disabled people, many kinds of disabled people, we know how to do Zoom well, and to keep sharing that information out, and to really listen to and pay attention to what deaf communities in particular are putting out there about, here's how you do this the not fucked up way, right?
Yeah.
Because we have, here's the protocols to follow. Yeah. We have to wrap, so I'll pause.
We have to wrap, but yeah, we're going to end on that note about cross disability organizing. We can't ever stop doing it, and we don't always get it right, but it's the work. It's the important work. All right. I want to thank everybody for being here, everybody who participated, who listened in, who Zoomed in from wherever. I know a lot of people are jumping off so that they can hear President-elect Biden speak. So just appreciate, everybody just giving us your time and attention and these wonderful questions that we weren't able to get to. Alice, I want to thank you for creating the conditions that made this space possible through your work and your activism. I want to thank Emily and the Longmore Institute, and I want to deeply thank Patty and Leah for being in this conversation with us, for sharing your minds, your hearts, your imaginings. And I want to thank everybody for just allowing me again to hold a space like this. It's an honor. Good night, everybody.
Thank you, Yomi.
Thank you all.
Good night.
Thank
Yeah,
you
go
so
ahead.
much.
Alice?
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
White text on a black background reads, "Thank you for watching." Please visit us on Facebook at SFSU Disability, on Twitter at Longmore Inst, or online at longmoreinstitute.sfsu.edu.